The crystalline towers of Calaria Prime had stood for 3,000 years, gleaming in the light of their sun like jewels scattered across the planet's surface. The Calarians had built a civilization based on art, music, and philosophy. They had never known war. They had never needed weapons. Their fleets existed only for exploration and trade, carrying goods and ideas across the stars. But now their cities burned. Commander Velnar stood in what remained of the Grand Assembly Hall, watching smoke rise from the ruins around him. The invasion had come without warning, swift and brutal. The Kresh Dominion had arrived with hundreds of warships, their hulls black as the void between stars. They had demanded immediate surrender. When the Calarians refused, the bombardment began. The Calarian defense fleet had tried to stop them. Their ships were fast and beautiful, designed for peaceful purposes but equipped with basic defensive weapons. They had lasted less than a day. The Kresh ships were massive, covered in armor plating and bristling with plasma cannons. Each shot from those weapons could destroy a city block. The Calarian shields had melted like ice under a hot sun. Velnar had watched from the surface as his people's ships died in orbit. Explosions bloomed like flowers in the darkness of space. Each flash meant hundreds of lives lost, hundreds of families destroyed. The Kresh had shown no mercy. They had not even bothered to accept prisoners. Now the enemy occupied 4 of the 5 Calarian worlds. Only Calaria Prime remained, and it would not last long. The Kresh fleet hung in orbit like a dark cloud, preparing for the final assault. Evacuation ships fled into hyperspace carrying refugees, but there were not enough vessels for everyone. Millions would be left behind. Velnar activated the quantum transmitter, one of the few systems still functioning in the ruined building. He had to send a message, a final desperate plea for help. The Calarians had few allies. Most species in the galaxy preferred to remain neutral, unwilling to risk war with the powerful Kresh. But Velnar had heard rumors about a new species that had recently joined the Galactic Council. They came from the far edge of the galaxy, from a world classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that survival itself was a daily struggle. The species that evolved there had developed advanced technology rapidly, driven by necessity. They called themselves humans. The message Velnar composed was simple. He explained the situation, the invasion, the massacre of his people. He did not beg. The Calarians were a proud species despite their peaceful nature. But he made clear that without help, his civilization would cease to exist within weeks. He transmitted the message toward human space and waited. The quantum signal would take weeks to arrive. By then, Calaria Prime might already have fallen, but it was the only hope left. 3 weeks later, on the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Greg Murphy sat in his office aboard the orbital command station above Earth. He was reviewing routine patrol reports when the priority message came through. The transmission had been flagged by the communications staff as urgent, marked with the Galactic Council's code for humanitarian crisis. Murphy opened the file and watched as the holographic display showed world after world under attack. Cities burning, ships exploding, civilian transports fleeing into the darkness. The Calarian commander's voice was steady as he explained the situation, but Murphy could hear the desperation underneath. The admiral was a veteran of 40 years in the Navy. He had seen combat in the Martian rebellions when colonists fought for independence. He had commanded ships during the Titan incident when pirates tried to seize control of the mining stations. He knew war. He knew what it cost. But he had never seen anything like this. The Kresh were conducting genocide, not for resources or territory, but simply because they could. They were proving their power, showing the galaxy that they could destroy entire civilizations without consequence. Murphy made his decision in seconds. He opened a communications channel to Fleet Command on the surface. "This is Admiral Murphy. I need immediate authorization for military deployment. We have a situation in the Calarian system. Multiple worlds under attack, civilian casualties in the millions. I'm requesting permission to mobilize the 3rd and 5th fleets for immediate response." The response came back within an hour. Fleet Command had reviewed the intelligence data. They had consulted with civilian leadership. The decision was unanimous. Earth would respond. Murphy began issuing orders. The 3rd Fleet was already on patrol in the outer colonies, their ships fresh and ready. The 5th Fleet was humanity's hammer, heavy assault ships designed for the toughest combat situations. Together, they represented 67 warships and over 30,000 crew members. The shipyards around Earth erupted into activity. Supply ships ferried ammunition and provisions to the waiting warships. Engineers conducted final checks on weapon systems and engines. Medical teams boarded with emergency supplies, preparing for casualties. Everyone knew this would not be an easy mission. Captain Linda Hayes received her orders while aboard the Independence, a massive battle carrier that served as the flagship of the Third Fleet. She was in her quarters reviewing navigation charts when her communicator chimed. The message was brief but clear. The fleet was going to war. Linda was young for a captain, only 36 years old, but she had earned her command through skill and determination. She had graduated top of her class at the Naval Academy. She had served with distinction during the Titan incident, earning commendations for bravery under fire. When the previous captain of the Independence retired, she had been the obvious choice for replacement. She read the intelligence report on the crash 3 times, memorizing every detail. Their ships were huge, easily 3 times the mass of human vessels. Their plasma weapons had longer range than human railguns. They had more ships, more resources, and centuries of experience conquering other species. But they had never fought humans before. Linda called her senior staff to the briefing room. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, her tactical officer, arrived first. He was a quiet man who preferred numbers and analysis to conversation. But his tactical plans had saved lives during their last deployment. "We're going to war," Linda told her assembled officers. "The Calarians are facing extinction. The Kresh Dominion has invaded their space and is conducting systematic extermination. Fleet Command has ordered us to intervene." She brought up the star chart showing the distance to Calarian space. 3 months of travel at maximum hyperspace speed. 3 months while people died and worlds burned. "I won't lie to you," Linda continued. "The Kresh outnumber us. Their ships are bigger and more heavily armed. On paper, we should lose this fight. But we have advantages they don't. We're faster. We're more maneuverable. And we come from Earth, a world that taught us how to survive against impossible odds." Morrison studied the tactical data. Their ships are designed for overwhelming firepower at long range. If we can close the distance and use our superior speed, we might be able to even the odds. "That's the plan," Linda agreed. "We hit them fast and hard, use tactics they won't expect. We make them react to us instead of the other way around." She looked at each officer in turn. "I want everyone to understand what we're volunteering for. This is a combat deployment into hostile territory, against an enemy that has never been defeated. Some of us won't come home. But if we don't go, an entire civilization dies. So I'm asking you now, are you with me?" Every officer stood and saluted. They were with her. They were all in, the human fleet prepared to depart. Families gathered at the viewing stations to watch their loved ones leave. Parents held children who were too young to understand where mommy or daddy was going. Couples shared final embraces, unsure if they would see each other again. On the Independence, Linda stood on the bridge and watched Earth rotate slowly below. Somewhere down there was her mother, probably watching the departure on the news. Her father had been a naval officer too, killed in action when Linda was 16. He had always told her that service meant putting others before yourself. "All ships report ready," Morrison announced. "We can jump on your order, Captain." Linda took a deep breath. Once they jumped to hyperspace, there was no turning back. They would arrive in Calarian space in 3 months, and whatever happened after that would determine the fate of millions. "All ships," she transmitted across the fleet channel. "This is Captain Hayes. Today we leave on a mission that will test everything we are. We go to help people who cannot help themselves. We go because it's right. Because when someone calls for help, humans answer. Let's show the galaxy what that means." She nodded to Morrison. "Execute jump sequence. Take us to Calarian space." The fleet jumped into hyperspace, vanishing from Earth's orbit in flashes of light. 67 ships racing toward a war that would change the galaxy forever. Behind them, Earth waited and hoped. Ahead, the Calarians fought to survive one more day. The Deathworlders were coming. The journey through hyperspace took 3 months, but for the crew it felt like an eternity. Every day they trained, running combat simulations and practicing tactics. Every night they wondered if they would arrive in time, or if they would find only dead worlds and empty space. Linda Hayes stood in the Independence's observation deck, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace stream past the reinforced windows. She came here when she needed to think, when the weight of command felt too heavy. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Lieutenant Morrison approached, carrying a datapad. "Captain, I have the latest intelligence reports from our scouts," he said quietly. They jumped ahead to gather information. "The news is not good." Linda turned to face him. "Show me." Morrison activated the datapad, displaying images captured by the scout ships. 4 Calarian worlds showed extensive damage from orbital bombardment. Cities reduced to rubble, forests burned to ash. The Kresh were not just conquering, they were destroying everything. "What about Calaria Prime?" Linda asked. "Still holding," Morrison replied. "Barely. The Kresh have it surrounded but haven't launched their final assault yet. Intelligence thinks they're using it as bait, hoping to draw out any remaining Calarian forces." Linda studied the tactical display. The Kresh fleet was concentrated around Calaria 3, conducting what looked like training exercises. They were confident, almost casual in their movements. They did not expect any real threat. "That's their mistake," Linda said softly. "They think they've already won. Send orders to all ships. We emerge from hyperspace at the edge of the system, behind the moon of Calaria 3. We'll use it to mask our approach." Morrison nodded. "When do we attack?" "Immediately," Linda answered. "We don't give them time to prepare. We hit them before they know we're there." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly where Linda had planned. The massive moon of Calaria 3 filled their view, hiding them from Kresh sensors. On every ship, crews rushed to battle stations. Weapons powered up, shields activated. Fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits. On the Independence's bridge, tension filled the air like electricity before a storm. Linda sat in her command chair, her hands steady on the armrests. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person focused on their task. "Scanning the system now," Morrison reported. "I count 47 Kresh ships around Calaria 3, mix of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. They're clustered together, probably finishing their bombardment runs." Linda nodded. The Kresh were grouped tightly, making them an easy target, but also allowing them to concentrate their firepower. "It would be a brutal fight. All ships prepare to engage," she transmitted across the fleet channel. "Remember your training. Stay mobile, watch your shields, and cover your wingmates. We're faster than they are. Use that advantage." The human fleet moved out from behind the moon. 67 warships accelerating toward the enemy, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space. For a few precious seconds, the Kresh did not notice them. Those seconds made all the difference. "Weapons range in 10 seconds, Morrison counted down. 9, 8, 7, Linda leaned forward. "All batteries lock targets. Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Range. Fire." The Independence's heavy railguns spoke with thunder that could be felt through the ship's hull. Solid projectiles, each weighing several tons, accelerated to incredible speeds. They crossed the distance to the nearest Kresh battleship in seconds, slamming into its shields with devastating force. All across the human fleet, the same scene repeated. Railguns fired in coordinated volleys, overwhelming Kresh shields through concentrated firepower. Missiles launched in swarms, their guidance systems locked onto specific weak points in enemy armor. The first Kresh ship died before its crew could react. Its shields collapsed under the sustained barrage. Railgun rounds punched through the hull, tearing through internal systems. Secondary explosions rippled across its length before the main reactor detonated, turning the ship into an expanding ball of fire and debris. Now the Kresh knew they were under attack. Alarms blared across their fleet. Ships that had been lazily orbiting the planet suddenly scrambled to form defensive positions. Plasma cannons swung toward the approaching human fleet, charging up for return fire. But the humans were already moving. The destroyer squadron, lighter and faster than the main fleet, broke formation and accelerated past the Kresh line. They swept behind the enemy formation, their weapons targeting engines and sensors. The Kresh tried to track them, but the human ships were too quick. Dancing between plasma shots with precision flying, Captain Steve Palmer commanded the destroyer Washington, leading his squadron in the flanking maneuver. His ship rolled and spun, evading enemy fire by meters while his weapons officer maintained steady targeting on a Kresh cruiser. "Pour it on," Palmer ordered. "Concentrate fire on those engines." The Washington's railguns hammered the Kresh cruiser from behind. Without its forward shields to protect it, the enemy ship took massive damage. Its engines exploded in a cascade of failures, leaving it dead in space. "Target disabled," Palmer's tactical officer reported. Moving to next target. The Washington and her sister destroyers continued their deadly dance, crippling ship after ship, while staying one step ahead of the Kresh return fire. On the Independence, Linda watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The plan was working. The Kresh fleet was caught between two forces, unable to concentrate effectively. Now it was time to press the advantage. Helm, bring us into close range, she ordered. Morrison, target that command ship. I want it out of the fight. The Independence accelerated directly toward the largest Kresh vessel, a massive battleship that appeared to be coordinating the enemy response. Plasma bolts streaked toward the human carrier, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize a city block. The Independence's shields flared bright as they absorbed the impacts, energy readings spiking dangerously high. Shields holding at 60%, Morrison reported, his voice tight. But we can't take many more hits like that. We won't need to, Linda replied. Helm, evasive pattern Delta. Get us an angle on their flank. The massive carrier rolled, presenting its narrow profile to the enemy fire while bringing its full weapon arrays to bear. At this range, barely 3 kilometers between the ships, the Independence could not miss. Fire everything, Linda commanded. The carrier's arsenal unleashed in one devastating volley. Heavy railguns, missile batteries, and energy weapons all fired simultaneously. The Kresh battleship's shields, designed to deflect long-range attacks, were overwhelmed instantly. Weapons fire tore into the hull, ripping through armor plating like paper. The Kresh ship tried to return fire, but half its weapons were already destroyed. The Independence poured on more fire, systematically dismantling the enemy vessel. Within 2 minutes, the battleship was a burning wreck, atmosphere venting into space through dozens of hull breaches. Target neutralized, Morrison reported. Enemy fleet is breaking formation. Some ships are trying to flee. Don't let them, Linda ordered. Signal all ships. Pursue and destroy any vessel attempting to escape. We can't let them warn the rest of the Kresh fleet about our capabilities. The battle raged for another hour. The human fleet pressed their attack ruthlessly, using their superior speed and tactics to overcome the Kresh advantage in size and firepower. Human captains had studied ancient naval battles from Earth's history, learning lessons from centuries of warfare. Those lessons served them well now. The Kresh fought with savage determination, but they were unprepared for human tactics. They were used to fighting enemies who stood and traded shots, relying on shields and armor to absorb damage. The humans refused to fight that way. They struck from unexpected angles, concentrated fire on single targets, and never stayed still long enough to become easy targets. Lieutenant Commander Paul Griffin led his fighter squadron into the battle halfway through the engagement. The Reapers launched from the Independence's bays, small craft that darted between the massive capital ships like angry insects. All Reapers, form up on me, Griffin transmitted. We're going after those cruisers harassing the Washington. Let's give Captain Palmer some breathing room. His squadron of 12 fighters accelerated toward a group of 3 Kresh cruisers that were pursuing Palmer's destroyer. The enemy ships were focused on their prey, not watching for threats from other directions. Griffin smiled grimly. That would be their last mistake. Arm missiles. Lock targets, he ordered. Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. 48 missiles launched from the fighter squadron streaking toward the Kresh cruisers. The enemy point defense systems engaged, shooting down many of the incoming weapons. But not all. Enough missiles got through to cripple 2 cruisers and heavily damage the 3rd. Good shooting, Reapers, Griffin called out. Now let's finish them. Attack run, pattern Charlie. The fighters dove toward the damaged cruisers, their railguns blazing. At such close range against already weakened ships, they were devastatingly effective. The first cruiser broke apart under the sustained fire. The second tried to flee, but another volley from the fighters tore through its engines, leaving it drifting helplessly. By the time the battle ended, the Kresh fleet had been destroyed. Of the 47 ships that had been bombarding Kalaria 3, only 5. The human fleet spent 2 days at Kalaria 3, helping with rescue operations and making repairs to damaged ships. Engineers worked around the clock, patching hull breaches and replacing burned-out systems. Medical teams treated the wounded, both human and Kalarian alike. Ambassador Trelva came aboard the Independence to meet with Captain Linda Hayes in person. It was her first time on a human warship, and everything about it unsettled her. The corridors were narrow and efficient, designed for function rather than beauty. The crew moved with purpose, their movements precise and economical. And everywhere she looked, she saw reminders that this was a ship built for war. Linda met her in the observation deck, a large room with windows looking out at the stars. It was the closest thing the Independence had to a peaceful space, away from the constant activity of the bridge and engineering sections. "Ambassador Trelva," Linda said, offering her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome aboard the Independence." Trelva studied the hand for a moment before carefully taking it. The human's grip was firm but gentle, another reminder of the controlled strength these beings possessed. "Thank you for meeting with me, Captain Hayes," Trelva said. "I wanted to speak with you privately, away from the formalities of official communication." "Of course," Linda replied. "Please sit. Can I offer you anything? Water, tea?" They settled into chairs near the window. Trelva accepted a cup of tea, marveling at the simple ceramic cup. Even in small things, humans showed their practical nature. "I must confess something to you," Trelva began. "When we sent the message asking for help, we knew very little about humanity. We had heard rumors that you came from a death world, that you were new to the Galactic Council, but we did not know if you would answer, or if you could help even if you wanted to." Linda nodded. "And now that you've seen us fight?" "Now I am afraid," Trelva said honestly. "Not of what you might do to us, but of what you are. Captain Hayes. My people have been civilized for 3,000 years. We have never known war. Our military exists only for defense, and even that is minimal. But your species is only a few hundred years beyond your first industrial revolution, yet you have weapons and tactics that terrify me." She looked out the window at the stars. "How did you become this way? How did your species develop such capacity for violence?" Linda was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. "Our world made us this way, Ambassador. Earth is not like most planets. The gravity is heavy. The weather is extreme. The life that evolved there had to fight for every moment of survival. Predators hunted prey. Prey evolved defenses. Everything competed for limited resources." She stood and walked to the window, gesturing at the planet below. "Humanity evolved as persistence hunters. We couldn't outrun our prey, couldn't overpower them with strength, so we learned to chase them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to work together, to coordinate our attacks, to use tools and tactics, and we learned to never ever give up." "That sounds like a terrible way to live," Trelva said softly. "It was," Linda agreed, "but it made us who we are. When we developed intelligence, we turned those same instincts toward each other. We fought wars for territory, resources, ideology, religion. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times. But we also learned. We learned that war is horrible, that violence destroys more than it creates. We learned to value peace, to seek cooperation over conflict." She turned back to face the ambassador. "The reason we came to help you is because we know what war costs. We've paid that price over and over. We don't want others to suffer the same way. If we can use our capacity for violence to protect those who cannot protect themselves, then maybe all our suffering means something." Trelva felt tears forming again. "You are a contradiction, Captain Hayes. A species of warriors who fight for peace. Predators who protect the weak. I do not understand it, but I am grateful for it." "You don't need to understand," Linda said gently. "You just need to know that we're here to help. Now tell me about the creche. If we're going to free your other worlds, we need to know everything about them." Over the next hour, Trelva shared what the Calarians had learned about their enemy. The creche dominion came from the galactic core, a region of dense stars and ancient civilizations. They were an empire built on conquest, expanding slowly but steadily for over 1,000 years. They did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who resisted. "They see the universe as a hierarchy," Trelva explained. "The strong rule over the weak. They believe that by conquering others, they prove their right to exist. To them, mercy is weakness. Compassion is foolishness." "Sounds like they never met anyone who could fight back effectively," Linda observed. "Most species cannot," Trelva admitted. "The creche have overwhelming military power. Their ships are massive, their weapons devastating. Most civilizations surrender rather than face destruction. Those who resist are wiped out completely, made into examples." Linda studied the intelligence data on her datapad, reviewing specifications for creche ships and weapons. They rely on brute force, size and firepower instead of tactics and maneuver. That's why we beat them at Calaria 3. They expected us to stand and trade shots. When we used speed and coordination instead, they couldn't adapt. But they will adapt, Trelva warned. The Kresh are not stupid. They will learn from this defeat and change their tactics. The next battle will be harder. Let them adapt, Linda said with a slight smile. We'll adapt faster. That's what humans do best. Later that evening, Linda called a meeting of all ship captains. The conference room was crowded with holographic projections as commanders from across the fleet joined the discussion. Admiral Murphy appeared from his flagship, the Roosevelt, looking tired but determined. We've won our first battle, Murphy began. But make no mistake, this is just the beginning. Intelligence indicates the Kresh have over 40 worlds in Calarian space under occupation. Their main fleet, estimated at 200 ships, is concentrated around Calaria Prime. We need to plan our next move carefully. Captain Palmer of the Washington spoke up. Sir, we took losses at Calaria 3. We're down to 64 operational ships. If we face their main fleet now, we'll be outnumbered 3-1. Which is why we won't fight them head-on, Linda interjected. We hit their occupied worlds one at a time. We force them to spread their fleet, responding to attacks across multiple systems. We never let them concentrate their forces. Guerrilla warfare, Captain Nicole Carter of the Carrier Enterprise said. Strike and fade. Keep them off balance, exactly, Linda agreed. We use our speed advantage. Jump in, hit hard. Jump out before they can bring their full strength to bear. We liberate worlds while destroying their ability to respond effectively. Admiral Murphy nodded slowly. It will take longer than a direct assault, but it gives us better odds. We'll divide into task forces, 3 groups of ships, each hitting different targets. The Kresh won't know where we'll strike next. The captain spent hours planning the campaign, identifying targets and coordinating movements. They studied Kresh fleet dispositions, looking for weaknesses to exploit. They reviewed supply lines, determining which human ships needed repairs or restocking. As the meeting broke up, Murphy pulled Linda aside for a private conversation. Captain Hayes, I'm putting you in command of Task Force 1. You'll take the Independence and 15 other ships. Your job is to liberate the Outer Rim worlds, the ones farthest from Kresh reinforcements. Linda felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. Understood, sir. We won't let you down. I know you won't, Murphy said. You've already proven yourself. But Linda, remember that not every battle can be won. If you face overwhelming odds, don't be a hero. Retreat and regroup. We need you alive. I'll be careful, sir, Linda promised. But I didn't come this far to run away from a fight. Murphy smiled slightly. I wouldn't expect anything less. Good luck, Captain. May the stars guide you home. In the fighter bay, Lieutenant Commander Paul Griffin was conducting maintenance checks on his fighter. The battle at Calaria 3 had been his first real combat since the Titan incident, and it had brought back memories he had tried to forget. Kelly Brooks, one of his squadron pilots, approached him with a concerned expression. Commander, you okay? You've been staring at that engine panel for 10 minutes. Griffin shook himself out of his thoughts. Sorry, Brooks. Just thinking about the battle. We lost Lieutenant Harris. Good pilot, good person. I know, Brooks said quietly, but we saved thousands of Calarians. Harris would say it was worth it. Does that make it hurt less? Griffin asked. No, Brooks admitted, but it gives the hurt meaning. We're not dying for nothing. We're dying for something that matters. Griffin looked at the young pilot, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was barely 25, fresh out of the academy, but she had the heart of a warrior. They all did. Every pilot in his squadron understood the risks and accepted them willingly. You're right, he said. Harris gave his life for something bigger than himself. That's the highest calling any of us can answer. We honor him by continuing the fight, by saving as many lives as we can. Yes, sir, Brooks agreed. When do we launch again? Soon, Griffin replied. Task Force 1 moves out in 12 hours. Task Force 1 emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Calaria 7 system. Captain Linda Hayes stood on the Independence's bridge, studying the tactical display. The system held a single habitable world with a population of 50 million Calarians. Intelligence reported 20 Kresh ships in orbit, conducting systematic raids on the surface. All ships battle stations, Linda ordered. Execute attack pattern Sierra. We hit them fast and disappear before reinforcements arrive. Her task force consisted of the Independence, 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 6 frigates. Against 20 Kresh ships, the odds were actually in humanity's favor for once. The key was to maintain the initiative, to keep the enemy reacting instead of planning. Lieutenant Morrison highlighted the enemy formation on the display. They're spread out across the planet's orbit. Looks like they're taking turns bombarding different continents. If we strike the northern group first, it will take the southern group at least 10 minutes to respond. Perfect, Linda said. Helm, plot an intercept course for the northern group. All ships prepare to fire on my mark. The human ships accelerated toward their targets, weapons charging. The Kresh were so focused on their bombardment that they did not notice the approaching fleet until it was too late. By the time their sensors registered the human ships, the Independence was already in firing range. All batteries fire, Linda commanded. The battle was brief and brutal. The human ships struck like lightning, overwhelming the northern Kresh group with concentrated firepower. 5 enemy ships died in the first 2 minutes. The survivors tried to form a defensive formation, but the human destroyers were already flanking them, attacking from multiple directions. Captain Steve Palmer's Washington led the destroyer squadron in a devastating attack run. His ships wove between the larger Kresh vessels, their railguns targeting specific systems. Engines, weapons, sensors, each destroyer focused on crippling rather than destroying. It was more efficient, leaving the enemy helpless while the task force moved to the next target. Northern group neutralized, Palmer reported, moving to support the main fleet. The southern Kresh group finally responded, abandoning their bombardment to race toward the battle. But by then, Task Force 1 had already repositioned. The human ships met the enemy charge with a wall of missiles and railgun fire. Linda watched as the battle unfolded exactly as planned. The Kresh were powerful but predictable. They relied on their size and firepower, assuming that would be enough. They did not understand that warfare was about more than just weapons. It was about tactics, coordination, and the willingness to adapt. Enemy formation is breaking, Morrison reported. They're trying to flee. Don't let them, Linda ordered. Pursuit course. We can't let them warn other Kresh forces about our location. The human ships chased down the fleeing Kresh vessels, destroying them one by one. By the time the battle ended, all 20 enemy ships were either destroyed or disabled. Task Force 1 had liberated Calaria 7 without losing a single ship, but the cost was not zero. The Independence had taken damage to her forward shields. 2 destroyers needed repairs, and 16 crew members were injured, though thankfully none killed. As the human ships moved into orbit to begin rescue operations, Linda received a communication from the planet's surface. A Calarian official appeared on the screen, his crystalline features streaked with tears. Captain Hayes, I am Governor Nalvin of Calaria 7. We thought we were doomed. The Kresh have been bombing our cities for 3 weeks. They killed millions, and then you appeared from nowhere, like saviors from legend. Linda felt uncomfortable with the praise. We're just doing what's right, Governor. Can you give us a status report on your world? What do you need most urgently? Medical supplies, Nalvin replied immediately. The Kresh targeted our hospitals first. We have thousands of wounded and no way to treat them. Food is also scarce. They destroyed our agricultural centers. We'll send down supply ships immediately, Linda promised. Our medical teams will establish field hospitals in your largest cities. We'll help you rebuild. Over the next week, Task Force 1 moved through 3 more systems, liberating each one. The pattern was always the same. Strike fast, destroy or disable the Kresh occupation forces, provide humanitarian aid, then move to the next target before enemy reinforcements could arrive. But with each battle, the cost grew. The Kresh were adapting, placing their ships in more defensive positions. They began using the local populations as shields, forcing the human fleet to risk civilian casualties or accept less favorable attack angles. At Calaria 9, things went badly wrong. The system appeared to have light Kresh presence, only 12 ships in orbit. Task Force 1 jumped in expecting an easy victory. But it was a trap. The moment human ships appeared, 30 additional Kresh vessels emerged from behind the planet's moon. Multiple contacts, Morrison shouted. 42 enemy ships were outnumbered almost 3 to 1. Linda's mind raced, evaluating options. Running would mean abandoning the system and its population. Fighting meant risking her entire task force. But she had not come this far to abandon people who needed help. All ships, defensive formation Delta, she ordered. Concentrate fire on their command ships. If we can disrupt their coordination, we might still win this. The battle that followed was the fiercest fight since the campaign began. The Kresh pressed their numerical advantage, surrounding the human fleet and pouring fire from all directions. The Independence's shields failed twice, forcing emergency repairs while the ship maneuvered frantically to avoid fatal hits. Captain Palmer's Washington took a direct plasma hit that penetrated her shields. The blast tore through the destroyer's engineering section, killing 30 crew members instantly. Palmer ordered the survivors to abandon ship moments before the reactor went critical. "Washington is gone," Morrison reported, his voice tight with grief. "The Hawking and the Newton are heavily damaged. We can't sustain this much longer." Linda watched her task force getting torn apart and made the hardest decision of her life. "All ships, emergency jump. Retreat to the rally point. We're falling back." The surviving human ships jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of 3 destroyers and over 200 dead crew members. It was humanity's first defeat in the campaign, and it hurt worse than any physical wound. Linda sat in her quarters after the battle, staring at the casualty reports. 247 names. 247 people who had trusted her to lead them. 247 families who would never see their loved ones again. There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she called out. Admiral Murphy entered, his holographic form projecting from her desk unit. "Linda, I heard about what happened at Calaria 9. Are you all right?" "No, sir," Linda admitted. "I led my people into a trap. Over 200 crew are dead because of my decision." "You made the right call," Murphy said firmly. "If you had stayed to fight, you would have lost the entire task force. You saved most of your ships and crew by retreating. That takes courage, too." "It doesn't feel like courage," Linda said bitterly. "It feels like failure. We abandoned those people to the Kresh." Murphy was quiet for a moment. "Linda, do you know why I chose you to lead Task Force 1? It wasn't just because you're a skilled captain. It's because you care about your crew. You understand the weight of command. But you can't let one defeat destroy you. The campaign is not over. Those people you think you abandoned, we'll come back for them. But we need you focused and ready to lead." Linda took a deep breath, pushing down the grief and guilt. Murphy was right. She could mourn later. Right now, people were counting on her. "What are our orders, sir?" she asked. "Regroup and refit. You've got replacements coming, 3 new destroyers from Earth. Once you're at full strength, I want you to hit the Kresh supply depot at Calaria 12. Intelligence says they're staging reinforcements there. If we can destroy their supplies, it will slow their ability to respond to our attacks." "Understood, sir. Task Force 1 will be ready." After Murphy ended the transmission, Linda allowed herself 1 minute to feel the pain, 1 minute to remember the names of the crew she had lost. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and headed to the bridge. There was work to do. In the fighter bay, Lieutenant Commander Paul Griffin was dealing with his own grief. He had lost 4 pilots at Calaria 9, including Kelly Brooks. The young woman who had spoken so bravely about giving their lives meaning had died when her fighter was hit by plasma fire. She had ejected, but her escape pod failed. By the time rescue ships arrived, she was gone. Griffin stood in front of her empty locker, looking at the photos she had taped inside. Her family, her friends from the academy, a picture of Earth's oceans, the home she would never see again. "Commander Griffin?" a voice called out. He turned to see Lieutenant Amy Walsh, one of the surviving pilots. "What is it, Walsh?" he asked. "The new replacement pilots just came aboard. They're asking for you. They want to know about the squadron, about what to expect." Griffin closed the locker door gently. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. And Walsh, make sure they understand this is real. This is not a simulation or a training exercise. People die out here. Good people. People with families and dreams and futures." "Yes, sir," Walsh replied. "But also tell them about..." The attack on Calaria 12 required perfect timing and coordination. The system was the main supply hub for Kresh forces across the entire sector. Intelligence reports showed over 50 warships defending it, along with massive storage facilities in orbit around the planet. Captain Linda Hayes gathered her task force commanders for a final planning session. The holographic display showed the system layout, with red icons marking enemy positions. "The supply depot is here," she said, highlighting an orbital station. "It's the size of a small moon, heavily shielded and armed. The Kresh keep their ammunition, fuel, and spare parts there. If we destroy it, their ability to maintain operations across multiple systems collapses." Captain Palmer, now commanding the replacement destroyer Miami, studied the defenses. That's a lot of firepower protecting one target. How do we get close enough to destroy it? We don't, Linda replied. The fighters do. We're going to launch every fighter and bomber we have in one massive strike. The capital ships will engage the Kresh fleet, drawing their attention. While they're focused on us, the fighters slip through and take out the depot. Lieutenant Commander Griffin, attending via holographic link from the Independence's fighter bay, nodded slowly. It's doable, but we'll take heavy losses. Those defenses are designed specifically to stop fighter attacks. I know, Linda said quietly. That's why I'm only asking for volunteers. This is the most dangerous mission of the campaign. No one will think less of any pilot who chooses to sit this one out. Griffin smiled slightly. With respect, Captain, I don't think you understand fighter pilots. We live for missions like this. My squadrons will fly. Over the next 2 days, Task Force 1 approached Calaria 12 carefully, using the outer planets of the system to mask their approach. The Kresh knew human forces were operating in the region, so they were on high alert. Sensor sweeps constantly scanned for threats. On the Independence, the fighter pilots prepared for the mission. Griffin gathered the Reapers in the briefing room for final instructions. The squadron had been rebuilt with replacement pilots, but they all understood the stakes. This is what we've been training for, Griffin said. One shot to cripple the Kresh supply network. The depot's shields are powerful, but they have weak points. The engineering specifications we captured show that the shield generators are located here, here, and here. He highlighted 3 points on the holographic model. Each bomber wing targets one generator. Once the shields are down, we hit the ammunition storage. That should trigger a chain reaction that takes out the whole station. Lieutenant Amy Walsh raised her hand. Commander, what about the defense platforms? Intelligence shows 30 automated weapon systems around the depot. The cruisers will handle those, Griffin replied. Their job is to suppress the defenses long enough for us to make our run. It won't be easy, and some of us won't make it back. But if we succeed, we save thousands of lives on the worlds the Kresh can no longer supply. The pilots filed out to their fighters. Griffin lingered, looking at the empty spaces in the formation. The pilots who had died in previous battles. Kelly Brooks and the others. He whispered a quiet prayer that their sacrifice would not be in vain. Task Force 1 emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Calaria 12 system. The Kresh response was immediate. Alarms blared across their fleet as sensors detected the human ships. Over 50 Kresh vessels began moving into defensive positions around the supply depot. All ships engage, Linda ordered. Remember, our job is to keep them busy. Make some noise. The Independence led the charge, her heavy railguns opening fire at maximum range. The shots were mostly for show at this distance, unlikely to cause serious damage, but they got the Kresh attention. Enemy ships turned to face the human fleet, their plasma cannons charging. The battle began with a thunderous exchange of fire. Plasma bolts and railgun rounds crossed the void between fleets. Shields flared bright as they absorbed impacts. The Kresh pressed forward, trying to use their numerical advantage to overwhelm the human formation. But Linda was not trying to win this fight. She was trying to create chaos and confusion. Her ships spread out, forcing the Kresh to divide their attention. Destroyers darted between the larger vessels, targeting specific ships to pull them out of position. The cruisers concentrated their fire on the automated defense platforms around the supply depot. Launch all fighters, Linda commanded. From every carrier and cruiser in the task force, fighters poured out into space. Over 200 small craft formed up into attack wings, their engines glowing as they accelerated toward the depot. The bomber squadrons flew in the center of the formation, protected by their fighter escorts. Griffin led the Reapers at the front of the attack wave. His targeting computer painted the supply depot ahead, a massive structure that gleamed in the light of the system's star. It was beautiful in a way, this monument to Kresh military might. Soon it would be debris. All wings execute approach pattern Delta, he transmitted. Bombers, stay tight. Fighters, clear the path. The Kresh defense platforms opened fire, filling space with plasma bolts and explosive shells. The fighters wove through the defensive fire with skill born from weeks of combat. Some were hit, their shields overwhelmed by the concentrated firepower. Griffin saw 3 fighters explode in the first 30 seconds of the attack run. Stay focused, he called out, almost in range. The bombers broke formation, each squadron heading toward its assigned shield generator. The Reapers escorted Bomber Wing Alpha, protecting them from the automated defense systems. Griffin's fighter danced through the incoming fire, his railgun blazing as he destroyed a defense turret. "Bomber Wing Alpha, you're clear," he reported. "Make your attack run." The bombers dove toward the shield generator, launching their torpedoes at point-blank range. The heavy weapons slammed into the generator with devastating force. Explosions rippled across the structure as the generator's containment systems failed. "Generator 1 is down," the bomber wing leader reported. Across the depot, the other wings achieved similar success. Generators 2 and 3 exploded in rapid succession. With its shields failing, the supply depot was vulnerable. "All bombers attack the ammunition storage," Griffin ordered. "Pour it on." The remaining bombers launched everything they had at the now exposed ammunition stores. Torpedoes and missiles streaked toward the target, each one carrying enough explosive power to level a city block. They penetrated deep into the structure before detonating. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a series of secondary explosions began, each one larger than the last. The ammunition cooked off in a cascade of detonations that tore through the depot. Fuel tanks ruptured, adding their explosive contents to the growing inferno. "All fighters, break off," Griffin shouted. "Get clear now." The fighter squadrons fled as the supply depot came apart. The explosions grew larger, consuming more of the structure. When the main reactor finally went critical, the depot vanished in a blast of light that could be seen across the entire system. The shockwave hit moments later, buffeting the fleeing fighters and even reaching the capital ships engaged in the fleet battle. For a few seconds, everyone stopped firing, watching in awe as years of Kresh supplies were destroyed in a single catastrophic explosion. "Depot destroyed," Morrison reported from the Independence's bridge, his voice filled with disbelief. "Complete loss." "There's nothing left but debris." Linda allowed herself a smile of satisfaction. "All ships begin withdrawal. We've accomplished our objective." The Kresh fleet was in disarray, their formation broken by the shock of losing their entire supply depot. The human task force used the confusion to disengage, jumping to hyperspace before the enemy could reorganize. As the Independence entered hyperspace, Linda reviewed the mission results. The depot was destroyed, dealing a severe blow to Kresh operations. But the cost had been high. They had lost 30 fighters and their pilots. Another 100 crew members were wounded in the fleet battle. Griffin stood in the Independence's fighter bay, watching the mechanics work on his damaged fighter. The mission had been a success, but it felt hollow. He had lost 5 more pilots, 5 more young men and women who would never see home again. Lieutenant Walsh approached him, her flight suit stained with sweat. "Commander, the new pilots performed well. Better than I expected for their first major engagement." "They did," Griffin agreed. "Brooks would have been proud of them." "She would have," Walsh said quietly. "Sir, can I ask you something? How do you keep going? How do you send people into combat knowing some won't come back?" Griffin was quiet for a long moment. "You remember why we're fighting? Every time I feel like I can't take another loss, I think about the Calarians we've saved, the children who still have parents because we were here, the families that didn't get torn apart. That's what keeps me going." He looked at Walsh directly. "And I trust my pilots. I trust them to be skilled, to be brave, to watch out for each other. That's all I can do. Trust them and give them the best chance to succeed." Walsh nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. That helps." After she left, Griffin remained in the bay, staring at his fighter. He thought about all the pilots he had lost, all the empty spaces in his squadron, but he also thought about the worlds they had liberated, the millions of lives they had saved. It had to be enough. The coordinated assault across 6 systems was humanity's most ambitious operation yet. Task Force 1 emerged from hyperspace at Calaria 5 exactly on schedule, finding 15 Kresh ships in orbit. The battle was swift and decisive. The human ships had perfected their tactics over weeks of combat, and the outnumbered Kresh stood no chance. Within 3 hours, Calaria 5 was free. Task Force 1 immediately jumped to Calaria 16, hitting the system before the Kresh could react. By the end of the day, all 6 targeted worlds were liberated. The Kresh presence in Calarian space had been cut in half, but the victory celebration was short-lived. Intelligence reports brought troubling news. The Kresh High Command had decided to end the conflict once and for all. They were sending massive reinforcements, a fleet of over 500 ships. It was the largest military force the Kresh had assembled in decades. Admiral Murphy called an emergency meeting of all task force commanders. The holographic conference room was crowded with projections of captains from across the human fleet. Murphy's expression was grave as he brought up the intelligence data. "The Kresh reinforcement fleet will arrive in 4 weeks," he began. "When they do, we'll be outnumbered more than 10 to 1. We've accomplished incredible things in this campaign, but we need to be realistic about our capabilities. I'm giving you all a choice." He paused, looking at each captain. "We can withdraw now. We've liberated 20 worlds and saved millions of lives. No one could ask for more. We take the Calarian refugees with us back to human space and call this mission a success. Or we stay and finish what we started, free every remaining world no matter the cost." The conference room fell silent. Every captain understood what Murphy was really asking. Staying meant almost certain death. The odds were simply too great. But leaving meant abandoning millions of Calarians still under Kresh occupation. Linda spoke first. "We didn't come this far to quit now. I vote we stay." Captain Palmer nodded. "The Miami stands with you, Linda." One by one, every captain voiced their agreement. They would stay and fight regardless of the odds. Murphy smiled, pride evident in his expression. "I hoped you would say that. Now let's figure out how to beat an enemy fleet 10 times our size." The planning session lasted for hours. They analyzed every aspect of Kresh tactics and capabilities. They studied the reinforcement fleet's likely approach routes. They wargamed scenarios and calculated probabilities. No matter how they looked at it, a direct confrontation was suicide. It was Ambassador Trelva joined him at the memorial. "Commander Griffin, I wanted to thank you personally. Your pilots saved my world. They saved my people. I know that words cannot express what we owe you." Griffin turned to face her. "You don't owe us anything, Ambassador. We came because it was the right thing to do. Because when someone calls for help, humans answer. That's just who we are." "It is more than that," Trelva said softly. "You are a species that understands suffering, that knows the cost of war. And yet you choose to fight anyway, not for conquest or glory, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is not common in the galaxy, Commander. That is special." Captain Linda Hayes stood on the bridge of the Independence as the fleet prepared to depart for Earth. Their mission was complete. Calarian space was free, and a new alliance had been forged between two species who could not have been more different. "All ships report ready for jump," Morrison announced. "We can leave any time, Captain." Linda took one last look at the tactical display, seeing all the liberated worlds marked in blue. 23 worlds freed from Kresh occupation, millions of lives saved, and the knowledge that humanity had proven itself to the galaxy. But she also thought about the cost. Over 2,000 crew members who would never see Earth again. Ships lost in battle, families torn apart by grief. The price of being human was high, but it was a price they had chosen to pay. "Set course for Earth," Linda ordered quietly. "Take us home." The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, beginning the long journey back. Behind them, they left a grateful civilization and a legend that would spread across the galaxy. The story of the day when aliens begged for help, and the Deathworlder fleet arrived. On Earth, news of the fleet's return spread quickly. Crowds gathered at the orbital stations, waiting to welcome their heroes home. Families prepared to reunite with loved ones. And the whole planet celebrated what their small fleet had accomplished. But Linda knew the truth. They were not heroes. They were just people who had seen others in need and decided to help. They had fought not because they were special, but because it was right. And that, more than any weapon or tactic, was what made humanity dangerous. Because a species that fights for others, that values compassion as much as courage, that refuses to abandon those in need, that species is unstoppable, not because they cannot be defeated, but because they will never stop trying. As the Independence approached Earth, Linda looked out at her homeworld and thought about everything they had experienced. The battles won and lost, the friends who had died and the millions they had saved, the fear and the hope and the endless determination to make a difference. "Welcome home, Captain," Morrison said softly. Linda smiled, feeling the weight of command finally lifting from her shoulders. "It's good to be back, Lieutenant. It's good to be back." The fleet descended toward Earth, carrying with them the wounded, the weary, and the victorious. They brought stories of courage and sacrifice. They brought proof that humanity could stand with the great powers of the galaxy. and they brought hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe could be made a better place. Griffin sat in his fighter one last time before it was decommissioned for museum display. The cockpit felt familiar, comfortable, like an old friend. He thought about all the missions flown, all the battles fought, all the comrades lost. "We did it, Brooks," he whispered to the memory of his fallen pilot. "We saved them all. I hope wherever you are, you know that it mattered." You mattered. He climbed out of the fighter and walked away without looking back. Some chapters had to close so new ones could begin. The Calarian campaign was over, but humanity's story in the galaxy was just beginning. Ambassador Trelva sent a final message to Earth, one that would be preserved in the archives of both civilizations. It read simply, "To the humans who answered our call, who crossed the stars to help strangers, who fought against impossible odds and won, you have shown us what it means to be truly civilized. Not the absence of capacity for violence, but the wisdom to use that capacity only in defense of others. We are honored to call you friends. We are grateful to call you allies. And we will never forget that when darkness came, you brought the light." Years later, young cadets at Earth's Naval Academy would study the Calarian campaign as a perfect example of asymmetric warfare. They would analyze the tactics, the strategies, the decisions made under pressure. But they would also learn about the why humanity had chosen to intervene, why they had risked everything for people they had never met. Because that was the lesson that mattered most. Humanity had not won because they had better weapons or ships. They had won because they had something worth fighting for. They had fought for the simple belief that when someone needs help, you give it. When someone is in danger, you protect them. When darkness threatens, you stand and fight. That was what made humanity dangerous. Not their weapons or their tactics or their Deathworld origins. It was their absolute refusal to accept that might makes right. Their stubborn insistence that compassion was strength, not weakness. Their unwavering belief that every life had value, regardless of species or origin. The Kresh Dominion never recovered from their defeat. The loss of their entire reinforcement fleet shattered their reputation for invincibility. Worlds they had conquered began to rebel. Their empire slowly crumbled over the following decades, until it was nothing but a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked aggression. The Calarian Confederation rebuilt and prospered. Their alliance with humanity brought new technologies, new ideas, and new hope. Together, the two species worked to create a galaxy where cooperation was valued over conquest, where strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the willingness to protect, and somewhere in space on 100 different worlds, people told stories about the Deathworlders from Earth, the species that came from a world of monsters and evolved to be warriors, but also the species that chose to use their strength in defense of the weak, the species that proved that the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy could also be the most compassionate, because that was the truth about humanity. They were dangerous not in spite of their compassion, but because of it. Because a species willing to die for strangers, willing to fight against impossible odds for what they believed was right, that species could never be truly defeated. The stars belonged to many species, but humanity had earned their place among them, not through conquest or intimidation, but through sacrifice and service. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be human, and the galaxy would never be the same. Relva, who provided the key insight. She'd been quietly observing the meeting when she spoke up. "Captain Hayes, you told me once that humans evolved on a death world, that your entire species learned to survive in impossible conditions. Perhaps that is your advantage now.